Composing your first orchestral work. In this series, we're looking at orchestration, chords, voice leading, and balance. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer and founder and director of Barney Music. I will be presenting my first orchestral work, Help Us on the Way for Orchestra, and I'm happy to announce that the first movement, A Safe Home, is now available for purchase. So we're on page 45 of A Safe Home, the very last measure. Now let's look at the brass. Okay, so we see that the tuba and the trombone 3 are in octaves. So they kind of function as a pair in a way. Think of the tuba almost as like a fourth trombone. It works in harmony with the 3 trombones. It's kind of like the pairing of the double basses and the cellos. Though we talked about for this particular chord, we have the double basses and cellos at the unison. Notice the other trombones. Okay, the trombone 1 is here on the 3rd. There's nothing particularly unspecial or special about this orchestration thus far in the brass. Now we have to look at the French horns. Of course, with French horns, there's always a delay. Why? Because they're transposing down a fifth. However, in this case, they're in a flat key, while the rest of the orchestra is in a sharp key. So what does this mean? What it means is you can't think down a fifth because it'll keep you in a flat key, which will make no sense. For example, you see measure, very last measure, you have a la bemol, A flat, in the French horn 4. But if you transpose down a fifth, you have D flat, Ré bémol. Well, that's unacceptable. We are in F sharp major. So you can't be thinking like that. You have to think correctly in the key. So the transposition hack here is to imagine that there's a bass clef. Okay? So the notes of the French horns are going to be Do dièse, Fa dièse in the French horn 4 and 3, and Fa dièse and La dièse and the French horns 2 and 1. However, be very careful, because when you read the French horns, I generally read from the bottom up. What you'll commonly have to do is to read French horn 4, French horn 2, French horn 3, French horn 1. Because of course, the bottom of the French horns is always the French horn 2 and the French horn 4. Okay, and we talked about in the first episode how there was a large gap between the upper region of the woodwinds doubled with the strings and the lower regions. Okay, so we're seeing that it seems like the French horns are going to be the ones to fill in the gap. That is very, very important. Okay, now let's look at the trumpets. Trumpets as well are transposing, and like we already stated, they're in a flat key while the orchestra is in a sharp key. So thinking down a second is not going to work. In this case, you'll have to think the soprano clef. So we have Do dièse and Mi dièse on the trumpets. Notice that the clarinets were on Mi dièse and La dièse. And one of the likely reasons this is because the trumpets were already here. If the clarinets were in the same exact notes, they would likely completely get covered up. So I had to push them up a little bit above the trumpets. But there's a nice link because the trumpet 1 is also on the same note as the clarinet 2. So you can't always just put notes in different regions. You also want to create a liaison, as we say. So now let's look at all the brass together. I don't have a pedal on this keyboard, so I'll play it slowly. I'm playing the tuba, then the trombones, then the French horns, and then adding the trumpets. Okay, and notice that the chord is complete even within the brass. The subset of the orchestra, the chord feels complete. Now let's just add the percussion. We see that the timpani is on the root. And we have the marimba in octaves as well on the root. And we have the xylophone up here. Remember, it sounds an octave higher. And together. So all together, I would say this chord is going to have a light feeling. Why? Because we have the bass, the double basses, kind of in a medium note. None of the bass instruments are really in their lowest register, I would say. Well, I guess the cellos are. So it's going to be a nice punch to the sound, but there's going to be a lightness to it. In addition, because we only have the French horns and the trombone in this middle region, we don't have many instruments covering the middle. However, it will be sufficient and it will add to the lightness. One final thing is notice that there's lots of third in the brass because we have the trombone 1 on the third as well as the French horn 1 on the third. Listen carefully. So there's going to be a nice hearty feeling to the chord, very warm. Have a great day.